It'd be hard to put it in a word, but if I had to say, it was the greatest person that I ever got to be associated with.
He was a man of vision, inspiration, and patriotism.
Realistic would be the first. Competitive, generous.
Bold, iconic, friend.
He was a big, wonderful man and had an influence on everything he dealt with.
He really evolved the company into multiple new disciplines. We diversified into new businesses, and he really took us from a one-product company into a diversified and dynamic corporation.
So he added a real spark and life to an area of collecting that hadn't been there before.
People just would love it when he walked into the room. He had such a commanding presence, and he was funny. He was the life of a dinner party.
You wouldn't get 3 steps in the door and people would be walking up to shake his hand.
There was nobody like Jack. He was one of America's great citizens.
I believe it was George Bernard Shaw who said, "Some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not." Jack Warner was the consummate why not kind of person.
Jonathan Westervelt Warner, known to friends as just plain old Jack, entered this world on the verge of a new age for America. He led an unusual life with a most interesting story. A story both unique and untold. An American story. Through it all, Jack epitomized the potential for success under the pillars of democracy and the American dream. This is his story and his legacy, as told by those who knew him. Jack was born into a Dutch family that had immigrated to New Amsterdam in the 17th century. Moved in a covered wagon to the frontier in the 18th century, and achieved the American dream in the Midwest in the late 19th century. His great-grandfather was an evangelical preacher who, to make ends meet, ran a local grocery store in Decatur, Illinois. Little did they know that the grocery store would be a catalyst for a new invention that would shape the destiny of the Westervelt family for generations.
He saw his family as the real first Americans. They were Dutch. They immigrated on the ship. They knew what ship they came on. They settled in New Amsterdam, moved out west in a covered wagon. They were regular immigrants. They're not wealthy, not prosperous.
Jack's grandfather, Herbert E. Westervelt, worked in his father's store and was exposed to the cumbersome way groceries were delivered at the time, using large, loose sheets of paper. From this, Herbert invented the first flat-bottomed brown paper bag and patented the machine that would produce it in 1889. This is the beginning of what was to be named the Easy Opener Bag Company and launched the Westervelt family from humble beginnings to success and wealth. Jack was born in Decatur, Illinois on July 28, 1917, with his older brother David preceding him. As the Easy Opener Bag Company grew and prospered, they looked south for fresh timber and opportunity. In 1929, the family founded in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where they flourished under the newly named Gulf States Paper Corporation and quickly became leading members of the local community.
They were the family. They were the first family in Tuscaloosa. It's the closest thing to the experience of having a royal family, really.
The family prospered and grew. Jack's mother, Mildred, was promoted to run the company, and Jack's father, Herbert David Warner, led financial matters. Jack and his older brother David were joined by sisters Helene and Joan.
I think the biggest influences in his life were his mother, his grandfather, and his older brother, who was only about a year and a half older than Jack. Jack and David were extremely close, and Jack worshipped David. David was a straight-A student. good at everything, and Jack was like his shadow. They were together all the time.
Although Jack and his siblings were born into wealth and privilege, success in life was in no way assured. He struggled academically with dyslexia and witnessed the tragic death of his beloved older brother in a diving accident at age 12.
They were away at camp, swimming. His brother was up on a large, tall cliff with some other kids and accidentally was pushed off and died right in front of Jack's eyes. And it just changed his life dramatically because he was devastated.
This must have been taken just before or within 6 or 8 months of the time that he died. And about the time they went on their trip to California. I think Jack must have felt that David was the preferred child, and that he always liked to be more in his mother's eyes all his life.
He knew at some point that the family was looking at David as the heir apparent. And now all of a sudden, all of that responsibility was transferred to him. Jack was not a straight-A student. He had dyslexia at a time that we didn't know very much about dyslexia. He was a C student. He was very different from his brother in so many respects and didn't quite feel adequate to the job, but yet it was a family duty. He would never have conceived at that point in time of doing anything other than what his family expected of him to do. And so that was a big transition.
Early to rise. The clock says 6:40, and the bugle says, I can't get him up. I can't get him up at all. But it does.
Stricken with grief, Jack went on to attend Culver Military Academy in Indiana, graduating in 1936. With his learning disabilities still a challenge, Culver prepped the imposing 6'2" Jack Warner for what was to come for him and America.
Well, for one thing, going to a military school will prepare you for college because you know how to go through an immense amount of things, figure out what's important, and how to organize. At some point, you're going to have to remember a lot very quickly, figure out what I need to know and what I don't need to know. And Jack could do that. And that's going to carry over into business.
After Culver, Jack attended Washington and Lee University, where he earned a degree in business administration.
We were all male, and we had a very tightly knit community. Washington and Lee prided itself on the honor system, which of course we still have today, which is what is considered honorable for and by the community. That was always a very important feature of the men's lives. That led to a strong sense of trust and confidence in their fellow students that lasted for a lifetime.
Jack's passion for athletics was also fostered while at Washington and Lee as a 3-year letter winner on the swim team. He not only set a school record for the breaststroke event, but earned second place at the 1938 Southern Conference Championship.
I think athletics, for the most part, has been a key player in sort of the flavors and the foundational aspects of the educational process here. It was an important part of the lives of those men in those days.
These environments influenced his values as well as his love for all things American, particularly George Washington.
He talked about George Washington continuously, constantly. Was his biggest hero. Going to Culver and growing up in that military environment, I think he related to George Washington.
I think with the Founding Fathers, he went to military school and then to Washington and Lee University and was a great student of history and revered George Washington, and also had a keen sense of battles and et cetera in our country. So I think that the foundation of the Founding Fathers was something that was very personal.
He was such a patriotic person. And I think he believed in the legacy of Washington and everything that Washington had. And because he admired him as a man, he would love to have been George Washington himself. He would have had a good time.
After returning home, Jack married his college sweetheart, whom he had met at the neighboring Sweetbriar School, Elizabeth Butler.
Well, Elizabeth was beautiful. I always loved Elizabeth. Her hair was always a perfect place.
As Jack was prepared to start at the company he would someday lead, his country came calling, and Jack would answer the call. In 1941, war was on America's doorstep. Jack enlisted in the U.S. Army Cavalry, serving as a commissioned officer with the Mars Task Force in the BAMA Theatre of Operations.
There was a program called Mars, in which worked with Merrill's Marauders and Wingate's Raiders. And their primary thing was to keep the Lead Hill Road open about 1,000 miles from Burma into China to keep the Chinese army supplied. He would have been perfect for this job for a number of reasons. One is he had military training, so that was going to make it easy for him to advance and get used to the military life. He was a horseman, but he was a swimmer. And he's up at altitude, he's hefting mules around, it's cold, they were each issued one blanket. That's it. Campfires were forbidden because the Japanese could find the campfires. So he would have great lung capacity as a swimmer, and that would come in very handy in high altitude.
He was a member of the Greatest Generation, and oh my word, do we miss those people who will bravely stand up for patriotism, tell children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren how important it is for us to remember the values of being an American, remember the sacrifices that made it possible.
Jack himself was an incredible leader and really was raised with how important leadership is and respect for the history of our country.
Returning from the war in 1945 at 28 years of age, Jack and Elizabeth welcomed two sons, David and John. Jack was finally given a position with his family company and an opportunity to demonstrate whatever initiative and leadership ability he might have acquired. Could he live up to the legacy of his grandfather and mother, who had capably managed to grow the company and prosper? Could he be as good as his brother surely would have been had he lived? He worked under the encouraging eye of his mother, Mildred. She was one of only a handful of women CEOs in the country, and the first and one of the only female presidents of a major incorporated paper company.
She gave equal opportunities to women. She created, call them preferred working hours for women so that they could see their children off to school and walk them to school or get them on the bus, and allowed them the flexibility to work shorter hours to leave so that they could be home to receive their children. And those policies were in place for decades.
Jack's mother was quite a civic giant here. And it's very difficult for a person to follow such as that. Jack did a good job of it. He understood it. He respected his mother.
She was very good at dealing with people and very honest, and people respected. She got along well with the labor unions. Anybody in the Gulf States Paper Corporation that wanted to buy a home during the Depression, she signed for it. Never had to pay. Never, always paid off their debts. But she was always there to help.
His appreciation for his mother's intelligence was apparent always. He gave her credit any time the opportunity presented itself.
She just had a great vision for the company. She was very, very disciplined in business, but she also, was very involved in her church, very faithful. She was a homemaker, very involved with her family. And I think that played a leading role in my grandfather's development. I think her visionary style ultimately crafted his visionary style.
Jack Warner became president of Gulf States Paper Corporation in 1957. When Mildred decided to step down at a time when our company is entering a new era of progress, she wrote,
"It was the largest employer in Tuscaloosa. So they provided so many jobs. I mean, they were the biggest deal in town.
He was active in his business. He was not an executive who sat behind a desk and shuffled papers.
He knew the necessity of continuous innovation in products. He understood the importance of risk as an element of innovation and diversifying. Many others don't. If you think about many companies today, that all that they did was defensive, not stepping forward.
Jack would not only rise to the occasion, but would equal and even surpass all expectations. Under Jack's 40-year presidency, the company dramatically shifted away from a singular focus on paper bag production. He diversified into new products and into 7 more states. The company invested in land and game management, broader paper production, and began a tree breeding program. Jack's visionary leadership expanded the corporation to new multi-million-dollar heights.
Jack was someone who was known as being the leader, known as being the boss, but Jack was also one who appreciated people he worked with, who had good ideas and who would express them and who would carry them out. And he surrounded himself with really good people.
The things he did during his career not only created a very illustrious legacy for the company and himself, but they set us up to be successful over, the coming generations.
While running a successful company and all that brings would be enough for some, it was not for Jack.
When I look back on my first experience with him visiting Gulf States Paper, the corporate headquarters, I was amazed by the beauty of the headquarters itself. And he went to Japan during the Second World War. The Japanese have a great affinity for wood and the natural beauty of grains. And he was in the paper business, of course. So this headquarters is an extraordinary, extended, and modernized series of Japanese pavilions. And it's surrounded by a Japanese-inspired garden and his own interest in gardening. So it ran across a number of different artistic endeavors.
Always a civic leader, he was instrumental in the development of the Tombigbee Waterway and was a strong supporter of the University of Alabama. An active equestrian and a visionary developer, culminating in the North River Yacht Club.
Jack's vision about Lake Tuscaloosa, and not only making it happen in the first place, but then how to maximize the beauty, and that's when he developed North River Yacht Club, the golf club, the tennis club, the subdivision, etc.
Jack was a lifetime gardener. He designed and developed his home and gardens at North River, an amazing sight to see.
He was not only a lover of art, he brought that into the landscaping and the flowers and this magnificent house.
The garden was started about 40 years ago when I built the house. It's cut right out of the wilderness.
If you watched him looking over the lake and his garden, you could just tell he saw something beautiful. And I think that's how he looked at life, honestly, like through this beautiful lens.
Inspired by his mother's appreciation of art, Jack was a collector from an early age. His love of our country, American history, and his extraordinary eye would change the American art world forever.
Jack had an extraordinary collection. The most beautiful American collection that I personally had ever seen, not just for the paintings, but also for the sculpture, was incredibly comprehensive, had beautiful decorative arts all through the American period. It had extraordinary paintings no museum could buy.
I would say that Jack was among a handful of collectors who set the market for historic American art.
But Jack was, I think, well positioned to buy great things at an early moment when these works of art were just coming available with serious dealers who were trading in this area. But it was a small group of people initially, and it took somebody with the passion and resources to pursue it.
But his name was already legendary in the American art field, in large part because he was the collector who bid on, successfully, one of the great icons of American art, which is Thomas Cole's Catterskill Falls, one of just a truly iconic masterpiece in the history of American art.
This is the capstone of the whole collection.
Thomas Cole is recognized as the father of the Hudson River School, America's first artistic fraternity, whose members were known for painting idealistic landscapes in the late 19th century. Today, it is considered to be one of the most significant moments in American art history.
The Hudson River School didn't really enter the art historical world with a lot of scholarship behind it until really the 1980s. And Jack began buying out of, confidence and, just trusting his own eye. He started buying some of what would become the great masterpieces in the 1970s. So he, created an interest in the marketplace. Scholars took notice, and it really impacted the American art world.
And what was most vital, and I think most central to the way he bought art, is it had to connect with him emotionally, usually immediately. He had this ability, almost uncanny ability, to connect with an object and understand it on a deeper layer, a deeper level, and those are the objects he bought. And of course, great art does that, and he understood that. And so he bought with that quality and that impact in mind. And as a result, when you walked around his collections, on every wall were masterpieces.
He was, in many ways, a connoisseur. He was someone who appreciated the finer things in life.
Jack always knew what he wanted. And if you've seen the video of Jack buying a Thomas Cole at auction, he took his paddle and held it up and never let it down. So once he was focused on acquiring a work of art, he was very focused. He wanted it, he would go to any length.
Another great masterpiece that he bought was Frederick Church's Above the Clouds. That painting over time has become almost like an icon. And that painting, I don't know, it was never really focused on until Jack bought it.
He said to himself, the great artists are these 50 American geniuses. And I just don't want a work by Mary Cassatt or John Singer Sargent or Robert Bloom or Severin Rosen. I want something that's irrefutably outstanding and so representative of this artist that it makes an excellent case for the fact that they would be representatives of the triumph of American painting from the early Republic on.
Jack's interest in American art did not stop with historical masterpieces. He was also a fervent supporter of living artists.
He always said, he had no artistic ability of his own, but he could see artistic ability in others.
He was continuing that great tradition of sponsoring works of art and displaying them.
I feel like it's really inspiring the way that he wanted to elevate people in the arts so much. And he saw these artists for being the talented and intellectual people that they were.
Jack was sort of my trainer. He really kind of made me believe a little more in myself than I did and the things that I could do.
I think it was 3 he acquired from me. He said, well, which one, how many can I have? I said, there's 1. He said, which one is it? And I pointed it to him. He said, all right, I want it. And he said, I want some more as soon as you can get them to me.
He has been a guideline and a mentor to me in terms of doing my homework, believing in what I believe in, but staying with what I believe in, not always listening to what someone says. Sometimes you have to go with your heart. Jack's always done that. He studied, and then he goes with his heart. And I think that's the best advice I could ever give anyone, and Jack's the person that's given it to me. Jack's collection is Jack. And that's what a collection should be.
Jack was the perfect embodiment of the rule of thumb that all museum professionals tell private collectors, which is buy what you love. If you always buy what you love, it doesn't matter if it ends up being worth $40 million or $40, you'll still love it. And Jack bought what he loved.
Gulf States Paper Corporation and myself want to welcome you to the Westervelt Warner Museum, the greatest little museum in the world on American art.
In 2003, the Warner Foundation opened the Westervelt Warner Museum of American Art. The museum offered tours to thousands of visitors each year. It embodied Jack's aspirations to teach about America's founding fathers, its history, and an array of topical conversations in the West.
In the Westervelt Warner Museum, what you saw was really the history of America, as well as the history of American art, both from the colonial times all the way through until the early 20th century.
Smaller museums in the regions also are vitally important. And on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, bring culture to audiences that might otherwise have a hard time connecting with such great objects. That's important, and Jack understood that.
You know, Jack always tied his interest in American paintings to American history.
Whatever book he was reading or whatever he was thinking about, he would want to change the art around to tell a different story. And it's really interesting that you can do that. You know, you can rearrange the same art, but it will emphasize a different story. Well, it would drive anybody in a regular museum crazy because you don't move art around all the time. That's just not good for the artwork. But that was a characteristic of our museum and of Jack. We didn't stop him. He had to. And if I wouldn't help him, if some of the staff wouldn't help him, he would grab somebody who walked into the museum off the street and say, hey, come here and help me. And they would be moving a $3 million painting with him. And it was, you know, just a source of endless amusement and frustration.
While collecting art was often seen as Jack's deepest passion, he was also a lifelong sportsman.
Definitely an amazing athlete, heavily involved in numerous sports to a very old age. Swam daily for a large part of his life. He swam across the lake, which gave us all quite, good fear.
He rode those horses, must have been till 90, he was 90 years old or so, jumping. A great athlete in that sense.
He wanted to be the best there was, and he proved that he could create the best that there was.
I was only hired just as a manager of the horses. He said, Dennis, you can ride. He said, you ought to try out for the Olympics. I said, Mr. Warner, I can't try out for the Olympics. He goes in there. Billy Steincraft is president of our equestrian division of the Olympics. He buys high gloss paper from Gulf States. So he just goes in there and calls him and says, I got a boy down here rides. I want him to try out for the Olympics. He said, well, okay, send him up for the trials. They let me go to Europe that year with them. I came back and showed in our indoor circuit, and I was the leading rider at Toronto, and I was the leading rider for the nation that year. As I made the Olympic team and we were showing some, he said, Dennis, I hired you to make me look good. He said, I'm making you look good. I said, I appreciate it, though.
He would always figure out my schedules for whenever I had horseback riding practice. He would just show up, he'd put on his straps and get his horse out and pretty much take over the lesson, honestly. I think he was just so happy anytime anyone in his family was like doing anything athletic, because that was so important to him.
He'd come to all of our sporting events, so baseball, swimming, horse riding. Some of the funniest memories I have are him yelling at umpires in baseball. So he'd sit right behind the home plate umpire, and if there were any call he didn't like, he was the most vocal person in the park, and he was asked to leave on numerous occasions.
Jack loved spending time with his grandchildren, like his grandfather did with him.
The one thing that always stood out to me was how involved he was as a grandfather and how caring he was and how proud. Hanging out with my grandfather was like hanging out with my hero. He was just bigger than life. He had this personality that filled the room. People gravitated towards him. He was so charismatic. He was warm. He was jovial. He was fun to be around. But he had a serious presence, and he took up space, and you felt like you were in the presence of a natural leader.
He was just a really good grandfather. Yeah, he loved us all a lot. He made it really known.
In 2007, Jack's wife Elizabeth died after a long illness.
Jack was very devoted to her. He went every day to see her, to my knowledge, until the day she died.
As Jack approached his 9th decade, he showed no signs of slowing down, focusing his time on the museum, his beloved garden, and celebrating a new chapter in his life when he and Susan Austin married.
When we got together, we both had a sense of a much stronger purpose. It was a good partnership.
With Susan at his side, they grew the educational programs at the museum, hosted symposiums and lectures, and traveled the globe in search of new acquisitions.
You could be in the museum any given day and there would be Jack Warner, and a school group would arrive and he would talk to them. I think he just felt joy and inspiration from looking at great works of art and these stories.
He would turn around and speak to one of them about something or other, in the painting, and promoting the values that founded this country. And I tear up. When I think of how special he was.
Jack and Susan also dedicated time and resources to the Warner Foundation, started by Jack's mother Mildred in honor of his late brother David, continuing the family's deep philanthropic legacy.
His philanthropy set a bar higher than any of us could reach, but we reached further because of Jack's philanthropy and his generosity.
He was raised with that sort of moral compass, and he came from a privileged background, and he, I think, understood his role as someone who provided service and gave back to the community in numerous ways.
At some level, he realized that it's not about us. It's about giving and supporting others. And there's a richness to that money cannot buy.
For Jack, sharing his collection, I would say that was the cornerstone of his philanthropy, is to making the collection accessible to as many people as possible. And that was something that lasted right up until his dying day.
And he was such a philanthropist and didn't share only his art, but supported really organizations across every sort of spectrum, from swimming pools to the Y to other churches. I mean, really, the list just went on.
The Warner Center gave students and student athletes the opportunity to go to the next level in their sports.
In terms of his love of art, and especially the gift of this George Washington portrait at Washington and Lee, we continue to mentor students who, perhaps like Jack in 1936, they don't have a lot of knowledge or background in art, but then they interact with these original high-quality pieces through our museum collections, and then in some cases, like Mr. Warner, We've created a lifelong interest and enthusiasm.
There's an important legacy in the Jack Warner galleries up at the Met, which I think memorialize his importance to the Hudson River School in an important way.
We will never forget his incredibly generous act of endowing this gallery, and it's a very important part of the history of the Met now.
One of the things he was proudest of was making his work on the Warrior Tongue Bigby waterway, making all of that navigable and putting that series of locks and dams that allowed you to get all the way from Birmingham to the Gulf. And his involvement in so many things. Well, the whole recruiting of Mercedes-Benz to come to Vance, that was his land. And in order to attract them to finally clinch that big, successful enterprise, he made that land available to them for nothing. And it was, he cared about the state.
I just don't think there's any question that Jack was grateful for the relationship that he had with this land, with this community, with its people, with its families.
He realized, I think, that some of the things that a person values most in life cannot be bought with money. And so he used his resources to better the quality of life of others.
Jonathan Westervelt Warner died on February 18, 2017 in Tuscaloosa, the place he loved so much and shaped for so many years.
The town is very different because of him being here and what he did and how he did it. The same is true of his mother and his father and his grandfather. They were people who put more into a community than they took from it. And this was home to him.
The worth of an individual's idea is measured by time, and his legacy has continued to live on throughout all of these decades and will continue into the future.
Jack is one of a kind. I'd never met anyone quite like Jack, and I'm not convinced that I'll ever meet anyone just like him ever again. I think they broke the mold when they created him.
It was another world to be in, where Jack could make anything happen.
Today, Jack Warner's vision carries on through the Warner Foundation with Susan Warner at the helm, continuing the mission of promoting an understanding of American history through art.
We may give grants to specific museums that bring in children to learn about how that art can be interpreted to understand history in a different light.
Thanks to the Warner Foundation, we were able to host a training with the Leadership Institute to teach about 25 young people about political process, political technology.
I'm grateful for the Warner Foundation. Otherwise, I never would have been in Alabama. I never would have been learning these things. And so I'm really grateful to the organization for allowing us to be here.
Part of what made Jack a great person was not just what he did with the company, but because of his mother and being taught to give back. All of the different things that he did for the state of Alabama, the city of Tuscaloosa, his alma mater of Washington and Lee. And he did so much over so many years, and he never really needed to get credit for it.
I know he would want to be remembered for his commitment to the arts and his phenomenal generosity in trying to bring all of us into the embrace of the arts. I think he would want to be remembered as being a champion of Tuscaloosa and the state of Alabama. And I think he would want to be remembered as a patriot. I'm convinced he would want to be remembered as a patriot.
I think he would want to be remembered for his avid love of history and his attempt to preserve it.
If I could live up to half of what he did, I'd be extremely thrilled with myself.
what he was, he had to be. And I loved him.
I want you to take away from here that you are an American and that you're part of history, and we have freedom here, and you can be all you can be, and that you're going to be a man of reason like Washington was. I want you to go morally uplifted and spiritually ennobled by seeing this and looking upward at those eagles. I want you to be a better American.